Testing, 1, 2. Testing, 1, 2. No.
Testing, 1, 2, mine's not jumping at all, but maybe I'll have it. Testing, 1, 2, testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Energy and commerce. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Still too loud, too soft. What if we plug right into the main thing down here, like we normally do? Actually, I packed us up. I probably didn't realize what was hers and what was mine. I can see something jumping with mine already, sort of. Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing. Now I'm not seeing mine move either at all. Testing, 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2. Oh. That could be the problem, huh? Testing 1, 2. Oh, I'm getting all kinds of stuff on mine now. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Testing 1, 2, 3. Yeah, I think it goes in that one. I don't know why I'm thinking that, but testing 1. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Testing 1, 2. Sound check for the court reporter. Audio check 1, 2, 3.
Well, good morning. I'd like to call the Subcommittee on Digital Commerce and Consumer Protection to order. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes for an opening statement. I'd like to begin by recognizing someone who is sadly not with us today. Last week, the Energy and Commerce Committee lost our staff director, Ray Baum, after a years-long battle with cancer. Ray was a dedicated public servant both here in Washington and home in Oregon. An exemplary leader on the committee and a good friend. Our thoughts and prayers are with his family during this difficult time. In that vein, again, let me thank you for being here today. Welcome again to the subcommittee's hearing today on oversight of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, NHTSA. The Deputy Administrator, Heidi King, is here to update the committee on many important safety issues at NHTSA. Oversight of agencies within the committee's jurisdiction is critical, and we thank you again, Ms. King, for appearing before us to discuss the NHTSA's priorities and answer questions. NHTSA was established by Congress in 1970 to oversee motor vehicle safety and is tasked with reducing traffic-related deaths, injuries, and economic losses. NHTSA accomplishes its vehicle safety mission through 3 major programs: setting motor vehicle safety standards, enforcement of investigating motor vehicle defects and administering its recall program, and research, data collection, and data analysis. Today, the mission remains to keep drivers safe. All of the tools at NHTSA's disposal are important, including recent updates to IT infrastructure within the Office of Defect Investigations. In recent years, our country has seen an unacceptable rate in traffic fatalities. In 2015, traffic deaths rose by 7.7%, and in 2016, we lost more than 37,000 individuals on our roadways. This 2-year increase is the most dramatic escalation in traffic fatalities in more than 50 years. According to NHTSA, the 3 main causes of accidents are 1, people not wearing their seatbelts, 2, impaired driving, either drunk or drug driving, and 3, driver error. 94% of all accidents are due to human error. We need to continue to work to find real-world solutions that reduce risk and save lives. Technology plays an important role in improving motor vehicle safety, and we are seeing more and more advanced safety features in cars on the road today. Over a year ago, the subcommittee began a review of these new automated features and then expanded to examining the path to self-driving vehicle technology here in the United States. After 3 hearings, 2 markups, and hundreds of meetings, we passed the Self-Drive Act 54-0 out of this committee, and the House voice voted to approve the bill last September. We'll continue to work to get the bill to the President's desk. We know this technology will not wait for the government to catch up. As other countries work to surpass the U.S. in the race for self-driving technology, we want to make sure that this incredible innovation and the high-quality job it brings stay right here at home. With that background, it's encouraging to see the continued focus at NHTSA on self-driving technology and the potential benefits to improve safety. When this process began, the first federal automated vehicle policy outlined one of the basic principles that laid the foundation for the Self-Drive Act. NHTSA is the national safety regulator for the design, construction, and performance of motor vehicles. This is true today and should remain true as we transition to a fleet that includes self-driving cars. Turning to driver impairment, I applaud the agency's recent announcement of initiative to combat drug driving. According to recent reports, drivers killed in a car crash in which drugs were detected surpassed those killed in crashes where only alcohol was involved. In 2015, 43% of fatal crashes involved drugs compared to 37% involved alcohol. The opioid crisis is having a fatal impact in my district and every state across the country. In 2016 alone, 4,050 people lost their lives in Ohio due to unintentional drug overdoses. I've been active in this committee and in my district working on this epidemic. The opioid crisis in America is far-reaching and devastating to families, communities. Combating the epidemic is an all-hands-on-deck effort, and part of it includes examining drug driving initiatives, like improving roadside detection, supporting law enforcement. We stand ready to help our communities address all aspects of the opioid crisis and save lives. We'll also continue to deal with the Takata recall. The scope and complexity of this recall has resulted in recall completion rates lower and a pace slower than has been frustrating both as a lawmaker and as a consumer. With recall scheduled in 2020, I look forward to an update on the status of this recall and any lessons learned by NHTSA that can be used in future recalls. I encourage consumers to visit safercar.gov to check if their car is subject to a recall. Deputy Administrator King, thank you again for being with us today, and I look forward to working with you on these many important issues. And with that, I'd like to call on the gentlelady from Illinois, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me first say on behalf of the Democrats that we also mourn the loss of Ray, express gratitude to him for his great service to our committee and our country, and send our condolences to his loved ones. Today we have our first oversight hearing for NHTSA, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, under the Trump administration. NHTSA continues to be without a Senate-confirmed administrator. In fact, the president has not even announced a nominee. Still, I am very pleased to welcome Deputy Administrator Heidi King and thank her for the opportunity she gave me to meet with her last November, and I look forward to continuing our conversation on innovation and safety. NHTSA faces major challenges. For the past 2 years, traffic fatalities have increased, reversing years of progress. At the same time, the agency resources are stretched thinner than ever, even as its staff is called upon to address today's safety challenges while preparing for the self-driving cars of tomorrow. More responsibility, less resources. The Self-Drive Act, which passed the House last year with bipartisan support, requires NHTSA to create and carry out a plan for new and updated safety standards. Fulfilling that mandate requires staff with the experience and capacity to ensure safe development of new technologies. Passage of AV legislation is just the first step. The long-term success of autonomous vehicles will be shaped by NHTSA. But NHTSA's work on autonomous vehicles cannot come at the expense of conventional vehicles. Consumers have been overwhelmed the last couple years with recall announcements from Takata airbags to GM ignition switches. Recall effectiveness remains too low. We made progress in the FAST Act by restricting rental cars under open recalls. Unfortunately, auto dealers can still sell used cars under open recall. Some auto dealers are even taking backward steps. In December 2016, AutoNation ended its pledge to not sell vehicles under open recall. AutoNation CEO Mike Jacobson explained, quote, "With the Trump administration, there's no way that issue is going to be addressed from a regulatory point of view," unquote. So far, he's been proven right. I have introduced the Used Car Safety Recall Repair Act to fix this problem. I have also pushed for imminent hazard authority and stronger penalties for violating safety standards. I would welcome the administration's support for these efforts. As we push for further safety improvements, many rulemakings, including rulemakings directed by Congress, remain pending with no obvious progress over the last year. I will be seeking status updates on several of those rulemakings during my questions. I'm worried about these delays because I know all too well how long it can take to get legislation put into effect. It's been a 10-year battle to get my legislation to prevent child backover deaths to be implemented. Finally, in 2018, backup cameras will be standard in all new passenger vehicles and lives will be saved. I wonder what other safety improvements are stalled at NHTSA and will continue to be stalled by the administration's anti-consumer efforts to minimize new safety protections, and how many lives will be lost in the meantime. I'm also concerned about this administration's rollback of energy efficiency standards adopted during the Obama administration. NHTSA is currently evaluating, or I should say, reevaluating the corporate average fuel economy standards for model years. I see that I'm No, I guess I'm not out of time. It's no mystery why cafe standards are being reviewed. This administration has bowed to industry pressure to lower them. I have also seen reports that changes to the standards could extend to model year 2022 and 2026, to model year 2021 and 2026. Maybe we will get some clarity on that today, otherwise we'll see what happens when the new proposal comes out on March 30th. Strong fuel economy standards drive innovation, as we have seen with the tremendous gains in fuel efficiency since the CAFE program began. I hate to see us reverse that. So, Ms. King, I want to thank you for being here today. I look forward to working with you on all of these issues. As long as you are in that role, I hope you share my sense of urgency in improving the safety and efficiency of America's vehicles. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Oregon, the chairman of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I join my colleagues on this committee in honoring and remembering Ray Baum, my dear friend and a credible public servant and family man. We all miss him, his humor, his great commitment to public service, his intellect, and to quote Ray, it's good to have you out. That was one of his phrases he would greet us with every day. And the fun never stops. And I think he would want us to keep that going. So I appreciate the words of my colleagues. This morning, we do begin a series of oversight and budget-related hearings across the jurisdiction of the Energy and Commerce Committee. It's essential that this side of the government, the legislative branch, and the American public knows what's going on in the federal agencies, and so we appreciate the Deputy Administrator for being here. You're kind of first up in this multi-week effort that we'll have before the committee, and we're glad you're here and glad the work you're doing at NHTSA. Safety on our roadways, as you've heard and you know, is something we all care deeply about. With a record number of traffic fatalities on the rise, increasing to more than 37,000 in 2016, it remains critical to evaluate NHTSA's efforts to keep our nation's roadways and vehicles safe. With the growing number of devices and services designed to keep Americans constantly occupied, distracted driving is a real issue. In Oregon, there are over 4,000 distracted driving crashes back in 2014 alone. My hunch is that's probably just gotten worse since then. 94%, we're told, of those traffic-related crashes are due to human error. We've talked about in the work that we did on a bipartisan basis with Mr. Pallone, Mr. Schakowsky, and others. A generation from now, we'll look back if our Self-Drive Act gets into law and collision avoidance gets into law, and we point out these figures, they'll say, what a bunch of barbarians. You drove yourselves. How did you text? How did you phone call? And so we need to move forward with our Self-Drive Act. We've done it in the House. We put a lot of work into that. I came to what I thought was really a solid piece of public policy and passed it, I think, unanimously in the House. And now we need to get it all the way down to the President's desk to have national standards and improve our roadways and give us safety. There are a couple other issues dealing with recall you'll hear about today, whether it's Takata airbags and where we stand on that, or just the recall issues overall. I'd appreciate an update on the agency's ongoing efforts in the recall of Takata airbags, next steps, lessons learned for the next stages of this massive, unprecedented, I would argue, recall. This recall will be ongoing through 2020, I'm told. And we need to make sure that consumers have all the information they need to get their airbags replaced as quickly and safely as possible. SaferCar.gov has a search tool you can use if your car has any open recalls, so SaferCar.gov. And looking at the recall issue on a broader scale, I'm also very interested in hearing about efforts to improve the secondary market players' ability to identify and remove recalled parts from the supply chain. I recently met with some folks in Oregon who are very involved in this effort. They're very frustrated about how the current system works and believe that there must be a simpler way where you could scan the VIN number and be told whether there are parts on this car that should not be put into the supply chain or if they are taken out. So I know you've had discussions about the ability for stakeholders to search multiple VINs at once or batch searches. So any updates you can provide the committee on NHTSA lead or industry-led efforts on this front would be greatly appreciated, because it's critical we continue to improve this recall process at every level of the supply chain. America's roadways are the backbone of our nation, far from just being a way to get from point A to B. Safely traveling for business, family, vacation, whatever we do out there is critical to all of us. And so NHTSA plays an incredibly important role in this effort, and we look forward to working in partnership between the Congress and the administration to move forward with our Self-Drive Act and continue to improve roadway safety for our nation's drivers. And so, Deputy Administrator King, thank you for being with us today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back and confess that there's another hearing going on I need to give an opening statement for as well. And so I'll be in and out, but thank you for holding this hearing and kicking off this effort. With that, I yield back.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Today marks the first time someone from the Trump administration is testifying before the subcommittee, and I thank Deputy Administrator King for being here. This is important for oversight and accountability. It's particularly important for this authorizing committee to hear from NHTSA, the agency responsible for automobile safety. Last year, the House passed a bipartisan bill written by this committee that would ensure that as autonomous vehicles are becoming more prevalent on our roads, that proper rules are in place. And specifically, the House bill requires NHTSA to update and issue new standards to accommodate self-driving cars. Unfortunately, that bill was passed with zero input from the administration on how or whether it could be implemented. And there are legitimate concerns that NHTSA is not prepared and is not keeping up with the quickly changing automotive industry. It's troubling that NHTSA does not have the resources, people, or expertise it needs to fulfill its mandate. It's also concerning that the administration clearly does not see this agency as a priority, as we've yet to hear about a possible nomination for the role of NHTSA administrator. Investigations by this committee have demonstrated how ill-prepared NHTSA is today. During this committee's investigation of sudden intended acceleration, we learned that NHTSA did not have expertise in emerging technologies, with little to no electrical or software engineers on staff. Then, during the ignition switch investigation, we found that NHTSA did not understand the link between the power mode status and the airbag system. What's more, at the same time, as we're working to nudge NHTSA into the 21st century, the current administration is doubling down on a hands-off approach. In February of last year, the President issued an executive order requiring agencies to make recommendations to repeal, replace, or modify regulations. Then in March, the President signaled that he was going to loosen fuel standards. And just last month, the Secretary of Transportation announced that she's working on a federal automated vehicle policy 3.0 to, quote, remove regulatory barriers for autonomous vehicles. And this announcement came just 4 months after Secretary Chow released version 2.0, which already loosened agency guidance. It's hard for me to understand how the administration is moving forward with an effort to get rid of important safety and environmental standards when NHTSA has not even finalized several important standards that became law in 2012 and 2015. And these include a rulemaking on rear seat belt reminders and one to improve protection of children seated in car seats during side impacts. NHTSA should prioritize completing these important rules that are critical to the safety of passengers. And safety is also essential when it comes to autonomous vehicles. It's a great time to be in the automotive industry and to be participating in its technological evolution. The work on self-driving cars is fascinating and promising. Some vehicles on the road today can self-park and automatically brake. And while it's important that we hear from NHTSA about how it's getting the tools and skills necessary to deal with the ever-changing landscape, I want to make sure NHTSA is doing what it must to ensure safety now. In 2016, more than 37,000 people were killed on U.S. roads, and that's an increase of 5.6% from 2015. And 2015 saw a 7.2% increase over 2014 numbers, and this trend is troubling. Cars are part of our everyday lives. We depend on them to get us where we need to go. We count on NHTSA to ensure that they are safe and fuel efficient. And I'm pleased that the Deputy Administrator King was brought on board at NHTSA in the fall. I urge the nomination of an administrator so that the agency has the full leadership needed to deal with the many exciting but challenging tasks ahead at NHTSA. And I look forward to continuing our discussion about how NHTSA can work harder to stay with the curve, if not ahead of it. If I have about a minute left, that I would yield to Congresswoman Dingell.
Thank you, Mr. Pallone. I'm grateful to you, Ranking Member. Deputy Minister King, it was welcome to the committee, and it was great to see you in Detroit. I'm just going to add comments to those that have been made by all of my colleagues about self-driving cars, which do have the promise to save lives, decrease congestion, and improve access to mobility services for seniors and the disabled if we get the policy right. And as everybody is saying here, we need to get it right. But to be competitive, we've got to make sure we've got a flexible framework that's going to keep up with the changing technology. And we've got to make sure we're staying at the forefront of innovation technology and that we're developing it here, not in China or India. At the same time, we need to make sure that safety is always number one. So thank you for being here. I look forward to working with you. This is the United States. We're not going to let these be built anyplace else. We need to work with you to make sure it's on the road and we're keeping everybody safe. Thank you, Mr.
The gentlelady yields back. And again, we want to thank our witness for being with us today and taking time to testify before the subcommittee. Today's witness will have the opportunity to give a 5-minute opening statement, followed by a round of questions from the members. Our witness for today's hearing is again Ms. Heidi King, the Deputy Administrator of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration. Ms. King, you are recognized for 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Good morning, Chairman Latta, Ranking Member Schakowsky, and members of the subcommittee. I am truly honored to testify before you today. I am proud to have served the members of this committee through the 112th session of Congress, one of the highlights of my career. Before I begin, I would like to extend my sympathies to the committee and its members for the loss of Mr. Ray Baum. Ray was a wonderful colleague, an extraordinary individual. We mourn his passing and are very much, I am before you today, inspired by his humor, his resilience, and his commitment to public service. Today, I'm excited to tell you about how NHTSA is acting on its mission of saving lives, preventing injuries, and reducing economic costs. As the automotive transportation landscape is changing at a rapid pace, NHTSA is adopting and adapting our mission of execution to assure safety while remaining in step with these changing technologies, addressing new and emerging risks, and encouraging industry innovation. Safety remains the department's top priority. As you mentioned, 37,461 lives were lost in 2016. Combined with an increase the prior year, these losses of life represent the largest proportionate increase in highway fatalities in my lifetime. The loss of life is, I believe we all agree, unacceptable. The rise in fatalities has occurred during a time of great change in the transportation landscape. More Americans are choosing to bicycle, to walk, to ride share. Both our vehicles and our roadways, the way we interact with them, are evolving at a rapid pace. As the average lifespan of motor vehicles increases, Americans are keeping older cars than ever before. We know that newer cars are safer. The occupant of a newer car is much more likely to survive a crash than the occupant of an older car. This underscores why it is so incredibly important to ensure that all Americans have access to safe, affordable, and fuel-efficient vehicles. Adapting to changes is how Americans travel. NHTSA will continue to employ risk management best practices across all of our activities to identify, to assess, mitigate, and continuously improve our management of highway safety risks. One of the emerging risks that NHTSA is fully committed to mitigating is the problem of drug-impaired driving. We know that many people switch between use of alcohol and illicit drugs or consume them together. And we need to consider both drugs and alcohol in addressing the serious problem of impaired driving on our roadways. To that end, NHTSA has announced an initiative to strengthen the strategies necessary to reduce drug-impaired driving on our nation's roads. Next month, NHTSA will launch the National Dialogue in a Call to Action, a national summit that will bring together experts and stakeholders to share best practices and identify near-term and longer-term strategies to save lives. This effort is intended to build upon the previous work of the agency and will complement the work of our state and local partners. We are all in this together. I have heard from members of the subcommittee that you share our concern and you have offered support for this initiative. I am tremendously grateful for your partnership in this endeavor, and I look forward to working with you. In our changing landscape, in addition to changing preferences and an emerging drug-impaired driving risk on our roadways, NHTSA is committed to assuring safety while also encouraging advances in innovation, in automation, and in changing automation technology. Last September, Secretary Elaine L. Chao released a Vision for Safety 2.0, our new voluntary guidance to encourage safe introduction of emerging automated technologies on our roadways. A Vision for Safety paves the way for the safe testing and deployment of automated driving systems by encouraging best practices for manufacturers and also for state and local governments, and by fostering open communication between the public, industry, and various stakeholders. Secretary Chao has also announced that we are at the Department of Transportation already working on an updated Guidance 3.0, which will be released later this year, and that will further facilitate the adoption of automated driving systems through a holistic and multimodal framework. We at NHTSA are excited by the benefits automated technologies can bring to safety, mobility, and the efficiency of our transportation networks, and we look forward to hearing from the public, members of Congress, and industry in the coming months on how we can further reduce barriers to accelerate the safe deployment of potentially life-saving technologies. As the technologies change, consumer choices evolve, and social trends continue, you have the commitment of each member of the NHTSA team that we will prioritize our mission in all that we do to save lives, to prevent injuries, and to reduce the economic costs of traffic crashes. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
And again, thank you very much for your testimony today. And with that, we will move into our question and answer portion of the hearing. I will begin the questioning and recognize myself for 5 minutes. Ms. King, safety is NHTSA's #1 priority. How do you see the agency fulfilling its mission with limited resources moving forward?
Very good, thank you for asking. Our resource question is addressed by the President's budget, which was issued on Monday. It can be described briefly as 2/3 grant programs and 1/3 divided between highway and vehicle safety. The 2/3 grant funding request represents our partnership with states and the fact that the highway safety is where the rubber hits the road, which is in our communities, in our states. The remaining 1/3 divided between highway safety, behavioral, such as drug-impaired driving or driver awareness programs, and vehicle safety to allow us to continue to assess the engineering, design, and safety and defects components of our program. In addition, the budget represents a shift towards increasing focus on the emerging technologies. Our engineers are hard at work to remain in step with the changing technologies, and we're very excited about the safety promise they bring.
Well, thank you. With the self-driving vehicle technology, as you've heard, we brought through this committee as a priority of not only the subcommittee, but also the full committee, as you know, already heard. Throughout NHTSA's guidance on self-driving technology, NHTSA has reaffirmed its role as the national safety regulator of vehicles. How important do you believe it is that NHTSA remain the safety regulator for current and future automotive technologies?
It is, Chairman, it is the law of the land. NHTSA is responsible for the design, construction, and performance of all motorized vehicles in the United States.
Well, as you know, one of the things that we saw with the legislation is when we're talking about preemption, and as a lot of states are out there trying to do their own thing, we believe it's very, very important, and that you believe that, we have that one standard set forth. And so what would you say to all the states out there that are maybe right now either legislating or promulgating their own rules?
We've had a very rich dialogue with the states. I'll say each dialogue I have had with the states, we all understand that NHTSA is responsible for vehicle design, performance, and construction. The states will remain responsible for the safe operation of those vehicles on the roads and the licensing of drivers. The traditional division of responsibilities at the state and federal level has continued and will continue under the existing law.
Okay, thank you. And as we've talked and you've heard from individuals from this community, the opioid crisis is just that. It is a crisis or epidemic that's across our country. We're now learning how many people are driving under the influence of not just alcohol, but drugs. You mentioned NHTSA's drug driving initiative. Can you explain your goals for this program?
Absolutely. The crisis is heartbreaking for those of us who have worked in public safety and who have been with drivers at the time of an accident, some of whom are losing their lives. It's unacceptable that we have the continued loss of life and the proportionate increases recently. One of the points that has struck me since coming to NHTSA 20 weeks ago is that the data is actually fairly scant. The crisis of drug use in the U.S. has come upon us so quickly. We do not have we don't have adequate nationally representative data sets, but we do have data sets in certain regions. We do understand the crisis is upon us. The initial goal is to start using the expertise where people are starting to win, starting to solve the problem, and make sure in the near term, best practice sharing helps us save lives today. But that's not all the initiative is. I see the need for us to set a path towards what we need to accomplish in the middle and long term so that the nation is on a path towards the creation of the data, the processes, and the systems we need to combat drug-impaired driving as well as alcohol-impaired driving. The dialogue begins on March 15th, and I look forward to having more information to share after hearing from our experts and stakeholders.
Thank you. In my last 44 seconds, NHTSA has issued another consumer safety advisory and Takata recall with increased do not drive warnings for certain Ford and Mazda models. Consumers should check the safercar.gov to see if their car is included in this recall. In my last 30 seconds here, could you provide us with an update on the Takata recall and what other steps consumers should take to protect themselves?
Yes, absolutely. To remind consumers that most airbags save lives. Thousands of lives are saved each year, but there is a set of airbags that are dangerous. And in fact, the do not drive order that was issued on Monday reflects that there is a set of airbags that can explode and hurt people. So we encourage people to, first of all, check the website. We would recommend www.nhtsa.gov, entering their VIN and understand whether their vehicle is one of the life-saving, one of the good airbags that we all keep operating in our vehicles, or one of the set that needs to be replaced. I encourage people to reach out to their dealership for a free replacement. And if subject to the do not drive order or the do not drive recall on Monday, that they do not drive, but in fact a tow truck will come and pick up their car and fix it for them to make it safe again.
Well, thank you very much. My time's expired, and I'd like at this time recognize the gentlelady from Illinois, the ranking member of the subcommittee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. In September, the House passed, and we've been talking a lot about it, the Self-Drive Act to promote the safe deployment of self-driving cars. There was a GAO report last November found that the Department of Transportation is actually not prepared to address the coming safety and infrastructure challenges from self-driving cars. You talked about something that's happening later this year, but all we've really seen so far are voluntary guidelines to industry. So when will NHTSA or DOT issue a comprehensive set of priorities for rules on autonomous vehicles and a detailed roadmap for implementation? Let me just point out that DOT said that such a plan would be premature, and I disagree. The autonomous technology is already here. So when are we going to see priorities for rulemaking?
Ranking Member Schakowsky, thank you for that question. I would quote Congressman Pallone in saying it's important to stay with the curve and not ahead of it. We feel very strongly that the technologies are still emerging. I would refer back to my experience as a research scientist at the old Bell Labs at Telcordia Technologies. We were in the years 2000 thinking about the emergence of telecom. What will telephones be like when we have 3G and 4G on our phones? We made some predictions. Some of them were right, some of them were wrong. That gives me a humility about our ability not only to predict how the technology will evolve to contribute to safety, but also how consumers will adopt it. The voluntary, adaptive, flexible approach that NHTSA has chosen and the Department of Transportation is choosing for all modes of transportation recognizes the importance of allowing the technology to evolve to best meet the needs of the safety community and also of consumers. So I look forward to continuing to work with you. It's very important to all of us, clearly, that we not only maintain safe roadways, but we allow the technology to evolve to improve the safety on our roadways.
The quote was, "I look forward to continuing our discussion about how NHTSA can work hard to stay with the curve, if not ahead of it." So things are happening. I want to be sure that we are not only, that we're looking forward. It sounds like you're saying we are. You also stated in your letter to the committee that NHTSA will continue to actively improve and advance safety here and now. So I have some here and now questions that look to me like NHTSA is not actually keeping up. It's years behind on a number of rulemaking, including some that were statutorily mandated. MAP 21 required a rule to better protect children in car seats during side impact crashes. This rule is 2 years overdue. When will NHTSA issue the final rule?
Ranking Member Schakowsky, we are completing research on that rulemaking now. I realize we're not moving at the speed that we would have liked to, but we believe that to protect our most vulnerable citizens, I'm a mother myself, that we need to get it right rather than fast, and that did require some research before promulgation.
Yeah, but, it's 2 years overdue. I just want to make that point, and that
Thank you.
we're talking about children and,
Yes, thank you.
crashes. MAP 21 required NHTSA to write a rule improving child restraint anchorage systems. By 2015, NHTSA issued a notice of proposed rulemaking in 2015, but there's been no further action. When will NHTSA finalize this rule?
Once again, I don't know the status of that rule. I can check and get back to you on that. I will say that, again, the research is critical to our getting the rule right. Oftentimes on a rule that's been proposed, we receive new information in the public comment period that needs to be considered. But I look forward to working with you on that.
We're talking 2015.
I understand.
The FAST Act directed a rule that would ensure consumers are notified of recalls electronically in addition to by email. The final rule was due in 2016, but NHTSA has only issued an NPRM.
That's right.
So far, also in 2016. So when will NHTSA finalize this rule?
I'm pleased to tell you that we do actually have now on the website at www.nhtsa.gov the opportunity for vehicle owners to enter a VIN and enter their email address and receive an alert digitally to changing recall information. So there is a functionality there. The rule has not been finalized, but I look forward to having that available I look forward to moving forward on that. But I will assure you that the website resources are there, so we are able to advise consumers of changes in defect status on individual cars.
If they act first, they have to go to the website.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, if I could ask one more that's pending. The FAST Act directed NHTSA to require manufacturers to retain vehicle safety records. That rule was due over a year ago, and when will NHTSA finalize that?
If I'm understanding the provision you're referring to, I believe that would have been completed already. It would have been wrapped up into one of two places, either our improvements to the Artemis system, our defects program, or it may have been in the rulemaking finalized on January 25th. But I'd be happy to get more detail from your staff, and I'll make sure that I'm understanding your question.
Okay, that would be
fully.
great. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you.
Chairman.
The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the vice chairman of the subcommittee, the gentleman from Illinois, for 5 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks for yielding and for holding the hearing. And thank you for being here today and your service and just even another additional realm of a long career of service. So thank you. I'd like to add my voice to the many here that have talked about Ray. And I picture Ray still just recently on the floor, and he came up with some exciting news to tell me about something that had happened, and he always just lit up the room. So to his family, our deepest sympathies. And for NHTSA, we appreciate you being here. We appreciate you, Ms. King, for taking the time. I'd like to discuss my amendment to the FAST Act, requiring automobile manufacturers to provide original equipment, defective parts data to the professional automotive recycling industry. Electronic sharing of defective part numbers and other identifiable information and recall notices with recyclers and others will improve safety and aid NHTSA in achieving a 100% recall completion rate. Every day, professional automotive recyclers sell over 500,000 OEM parts, which provide consumers and repair shops with safe and economical repair options. They critically need this information to ensure that level of safety. It's been 26 months since this safety provision was enacted. Can you describe to me the status of implementation on this?
Yes, we have done work at NHTSA to assess whether or not our existing VIN lookup tool can be converted to a batch tool. I believe that's what you're referring to. We have found that the system does not adapt readily. I'm happy to continue working with your staff on other ideas, but I have heard good news that many in industry have started to solve this problem. I've seen that there may be some other solutions coming not from NHTSA, as we all very much appreciate and respect the importance of the secondary market for auto parts, and am eager also to make sure that parts and vehicles that are sold are safe and in compliance with any outstanding recalls.
Do you have any idea on the time frame on getting this thing fully implemented?
I do not have a time frame for completing the work. As I mentioned, we did not see that our tool would adapt easily or adapt at all to a VIN lookup tool, a bulk VIN lookup tool. But again, I am under the impression, I have been told that there are some other solutions that are near ready that may beat NHTSA to the punch. So.
Okay. Well, if you can just follow up with us, that'd be great, because I think that's an important provision that if it's effectively implemented, it's critical to the safety of the driving public. So thank you. And
thank you.
additionally, several automakers in past hearings have assured me and other members that they're going to work with the auto recyclers to produce an effective outcome to this situation, but I haven't heard anything of that yet. Will you consider, if there's further issues, having NHTSA host a high-level recall safety summit of affected stakeholders to more effectively address any of these outstanding issues if it's a problem?
I absolutely welcome feedback from all stakeholders. This is clearly an issue I'd like to hear more about, so that I would welcome conversation, yes.
Okay. And cybersecurity is very important to me, and it's something we focus on a lot. As we continue to move towards an increasing connected world, we have to be mindful of cybersecurity and do what we can to address these concerns. As you may know, I introduced H.R. 3407, which was eventually rolled into the Self-Drive Act. The bill requires manufacturers to maintain a cybersecurity plan to identify an officer as the point of contact with responsibility for management of cybersecurity, a process for limiting access to automated driving systems, and a process for training on cybersecurity. Can you please walk me through NHTSA's approach to cybersecurity and how NHTSA will consider cybersecurity in its safety evaluations of vehicles moving forward?
It's my great honor to do so. Cybersecurity is also a great interest of mine, a priority of ours at NHTSA. In 2016, NHTSA issued a guidance for auto manufacturers with respect to cybersecurity, and furthermore, cybersecurity is one of the 12 safety elements that is discussed for voluntary disclosure in a Vision for Safety 2.0, issued September of 2017. I find myself also very excited about the Auto ISAC, the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is a group of not only auto manufacturers, but also suppliers and cybersecurity experts who have convened a vigorous dialogue to understand how we can share best practices and get ahead of the risks before they manifest themselves in our vehicles. I attended and was honored to give a keynote at their inaugural meeting recently, and look forward to seeing that conversation blossom.
Okay. I have another question, but in the interest of time, I won't ask it, but I'll just finish by saying that cybersecurity is essential. And obviously, as we go forward in this amazingly interconnected world, there's some really good opportunities and some really bad things that can frighten you. So I appreciate you taking a serious look at that, and I'll yield back the remainder.
Well, thank you very much. The gentleman yields back the remainder of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, the ranking member of the full committee, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to continue on Ranking Member Schakowsky's line of questioning. I agree that NHTSA has been falling behind on its safety mission, and I also ask that you keep your answers short because I have a bunch of questions. They're not difficult, though. One area that has been falling behind is the National 911 Office housed at NHTSA and jointly run with the NTIA. 6 years ago, Congress charged the 9/11 office with issuing $115 million in grants to help deploy Next Generation 911. Unfortunately, the 911 office has yet to even finalize its grant-making rules. So my question is, when can we expect the 911 office to finalize the rules and actually award the grants?
You will see a rulemaking coming forward soon this year. As a former 911 dispatcher, I share your sense of urgency. It's absolutely critical. Thank you for your support.
Thank you. So when it comes to really deploying the Next Generation 911 across the country, we're going to need more money, and that's why I've co-sponsored the Next Generation 911 Act of 2017 with Representatives Eshoo and Torres, which paves the way for Congress to fully fund Next Generation 911. If that bill becomes the law, will the 911 office be prepared to administer such a larger grant program on schedule this time?
I look forward to working with you and with your staff to better understand the bill and how we would implement it.
Okay, so I guess you figure you haven't really studied it much, so it's hard to answer, right?
I'm very excited in concept about improving our 911 system.
All right. NHTSA is also overdue to update the new car assessment program, or NCAP. NCAP is an important tool for incentivizing manufacturers to produce safer vehicles and for ensuring consumers can make informed decisions when purchasing a car. In 2015, NHTSA announced plans to update NCAP with valuable new information on vehicles' crash avoidance technologies and their safety in crashes involving pedestrians, but these plans have been stalled for more than 2 years. So the question is, when will NHTSA finalize revisions to NCAP so that consumers have up-to-date safety information when shopping for cars?
At NHTSA, we are all very pleased that the NCAP program has offered so much both to consumers and to auto manufacturers to identify safety features in cars. We did propose and take comment on changes. We received comments that were not raised various views that need to be taken into consideration before moving forward, but we look forward to moving forward soon, taking into account all comments received on that proposal.
All right. I mean, I think NHTSA's overwhelmed, Ms. King, and yet President Trump's budget request proposes a drop in funding for NHTSA's operations and research from $179 million to $152 million. Do you agree that ensuring the safety of new and more complex technologies associated with autonomous vehicles places increased demands on NHTSA?
We believe that the President's budget reflects the resources that we need to achieve our mission with responsible stewardship of federal funds.
So you don't think that the proposed cuts to NHTSA's operations and research budget makes it more difficult to adequately address the safety of new technologies like self-driving cars?
I believe the cut you're referring to was from a one-time bump up that we very much appreciated and that we applied to improving one of our IT systems, the Artemis system used in the defects organization. So we very much appreciated those funds. That work has been launched and we're already benefiting from it, and we thank Congress for that support. But we do believe the President's budget does reflect the resources needed for us to succeed.
All right. Well, in fact, NHTSA's 2016 budget identified a critical need for more staffing, noting that the Office of Defect Investigations had fewer than 20 investigators for 250 million vehicles equipped with increasingly complex technologies. But your 2018 budget estimate actually proposes a cut to ODI's funding. Now, some safety hazards may decrease with the introduction of self-driving cars, but I think the potential for defects always exists. So I'm confused by the proposal to cut ODI's funding. How will you ensure that ODI has the resources it needs to go forward? And what are you doing to ensure that ODI defect investigators have the skills they need to assess new vehicle technology?
Two pieces. Again, the President's budget does reflect the resources we believe that we need. We have, as I mentioned, system improvements we can benefit from. We are in the process of hiring and recruiting additional engineers to assist us in defects investigations. But we are, through our new, more effective processes, doing the work of not only responding to or reviewing each defect report that is received at NHTSA, but prioritizing according to risk and acting accordingly. Our systems, revised in recent years, allow us to assess the volume of complaints or notifications we receive. We assess, we categorize by risk and act and move forward, and that helps us to act more efficiently.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and it's hard not to say Heidi, but welcome back to the committee. It was nice to see you in the Detroit Auto Show last month, and I don't know if you got to some of the other ones or not, but we appreciate your role in interaction and look forward to continuing a very constructive relationship on a real host of issues. I would first note that last month, the U.S. Justice Department issued a memorandum to all U.S. attorneys handling civil litigation matters, instructing them not to use federal agency guidelines documents as a substitute for federal law or regs. This follows the approach laid out by this committee when we passed the FAST Act back in 2015. So I want to just say I applaud the Justice Department for following that approach that we laid out in the FAST Act, and I think that it strikes a much-needed balance between responsible oversight as well as unnecessary overreach. Two quick questions for you. One is, I know you're aware of what I've introduced, the CAFE, H.R. 4011, which provides some harmonization between the agencies. Is it, I don't know if the administration has taken a formal stand with a SAP, Statement of Administration Policy, on that bill, probably not. But given the lack of harmonization between the EPA and NHTSA's programs, it is possible for companies to be in compliance with one program yet get hit with a large fine by the other. So our bill attempts to correct that. Have you considered that issue in any ways administratively to resolve this before we get to that deadline, the big one?
Thank you very much, Chairman Upton. Yes, harmonization is very important to all of us. We recognize the impacts not only to manufacturers who are trying to comply with two different programs, but also to the consumers, because as we know, those costs borne by the manufacturers can influence what is available to and the pricing to the consumer. NHTSA is now working with the Environmental Protection Agency as we move forward on the CAFE rulemakings, and streamlining and making sure harmonization is a forefront is a part of that dialogue.
Thank you. You know, where we're headed, autonomous vehicles. Again, you were in Detroit. I participated in a roundtable discussion with Chairman Latta there. It is the wave of the future. We're very excited about it for a whole host of reasons. One of the concerns that always pops up is the protections, cyber protections, and not only along the monitors, you know, along the road for trucks and vehicles, but obviously just the applications of the normal applications of that vehicle as they proceed. What type of resources do you have to make sure that the proper safeguards are in place so that things don't go really off the road?
The laws and the operations and the systems we have at NHTSA apply to all vehicles, including automated driving systems. So during a time of technological change, and granted this is a technological change larger than we have seen before, but still we are responsible for design, construction, and performance in a safety context for all of the vehicles in the United States. So our continued, whether it be reporting of defects, whether it be our monitoring of the technological change, our investigation of incidents related to any vehicle, including automated driving systems, we are vigilant, we have all of our tools in place, and we look forward to watching the technology evolve to improve safety.
And do you feel like you have good cooperation with the industry themselves in terms of what they're proposing, what they have, and those tools that will be installed on those vehicles?
We have the voluntary safety self-assessment. There are two posted now at the manufacturers' websites, and we are now creating a dashboard at NHTSA where we will link to the manufacturers' voluntary safety self-assessments. We are hearing, although other manufacturers have not yet published theirs, they're being produced, and the opportunity to learn from one another and to have discussions around safety and incorporating safety into their design features is very much a part of our learning from one another, so we step forward together. It also allows that dialogue with consumers and with state and local governments. It's absolutely critical. Again, this is where we need to stay together at the curve, not to get ahead of one another as the technology is still developing.
And I would just ask you, if you're aware of some shortcomings with legislative ideas that you need to get through, please work with us. This has been a good bipartisan effort for a lot of years, and we look forward to continuing to have that type of relationship with you and the agency. Thank you. Yield back.
Well, thank you. The gentleman yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Michigan for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for yielding and for holding this important hearing. I'm going to build on what my other colleagues have been talking about on the Self-Drive Act. When the committee came together in a bipartisan manner, and I think we're all very proud of the fact that it was unanimous that we passed it out of this committee, it built on many of the ideas that DOT had laid out in the FAVP. We took the safety assessment letter and we made it mandatory. We took the department's recommendation and enhanced the existing exemptions process so we could build the interim pathway to market for AVs while the new federal motor vehicle safety standards are being written, but they need to be written to make an editorial comment. And for the first time, we required manufacturers to submit plans to NHTSA for how they're addressing the critical issues of data security, privacy, and cybersecurity. But Acting Administrator, I think what you're hearing today is an unease on the behalf of everybody, because we want to stay at the forefront of innovation and technology, and we also need to make sure that the consumer is safe at all times. And none of us, you say you've got the tools, but we're not sure you've got the resources for the tools or that we're moving fast enough or we're doing what we need to do. Can you comment on the Self-Drive Act and how it complements existing DOT policy, NHTSA authority, and why you're going to assure us, and more importantly, the consumer, that they're going to be safe and you have what you've got to do?
Yes, I'm very happy to do so. Very excited about the fact that we have echoed some of the similar ideas, this safety self-assessment, for example, being critical, not only to allow for the disclosure of the information, because as a good risk management best practice, a safety self-assessment allows each of the manufacturers, each of us as, I'll say, state, local government, or a consumer, to consider safety and get smarter. So absolutely love that. We love the fact that the expanded exemptions allows for the safe testing of vehicles, because we won't know if vehicles are safe unless we have testing. So there are fantastic provisions in the bill that we look forward to continuing to work together on. We are excited about our shared mission of assuring safety while technology evolves, while we assure safety in step with technology. Again, the current authorities of NHTSA with respect to design, construction, and performance, we are on duty. We continue to follow closely the trends and the changes both in the technology and what we're seeing on our roadways in the testing environment, and we look forward to working together.
Thank you. We all have so many questions. It's hard here in this 5 minutes. So I'm going to move to the midterm review. Because I think that my colleague from Michigan raised a subject that's very important. In order for our companies to make the investments they need to realize the benefits on AVs, we need to make sure that this industry stays healthy, and fuel economy plays a big role in this. Strong fuel economy standards give the industry the certainty that they need while continuing to drive innovation that saves consumers money at the pump. Right now, we're entering a critical phase of the midterm review, and I want to urge you, Deputy Administrator King, to keep all stakeholders at the table in a productive manner as we go through this, so we can achieve a negotiated solution that maintains one national program that all my colleagues at this table can support. So I'm going to beg you to do that. And could you comment on that a little? And how do you feel about post-2025 standards?
Thank you for asking. It is very important to me. It's very
Which I
important to all of
support,
the
by the way.
Department of Transportation that we hear from and keep all stakeholders in the dialogue. The CAFE standards, the greenhouse gas standards at EPA, our rulemaking that we are developing jointly, it's very important to all of us, not only to manufacturers and consumers, but to the communities in which our vehicles operate. Very much encourage all stakeholders to have their views heard. We look forward to an open and vigorous public comment period in particular. As you know, the rulemaking can be very complex. There's a great deal of analysis, engineering and economic, that is completed for that rulemaking under the applicable executive orders. We will continue, as NHTSA has always done, to be committed to a transparent process where that information is all publicly available, where anyone who would like to contribute can review and submit their thoughts on what they think can be done or should be done differently. It's very important to us to get it right.
Any comment on post-2025 standards in the 16 seconds left?
Thank you. The laws applicable to NHTSA, under EPCA, we are authorized to set standards for 5 years at a time. So we must, under the law, set standards for 5-year increments.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The gentlelady yields back, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to you. I was pleased to hear your mention of NHTSA's commitment to mitigating drug-impaired driving. New Jersey, which I represent, is considering legalizing recreational marijuana. Can you discuss any trends that you have seen among traffic accidents in states that have legalized marijuana for recreational use?
Congressman Lance, thank you for that question. We don't have strong, robust nationwide data yet, but I can share with you the nature of conversations I've had with some jurisdictions. They have already seen, prior to legalization of recreational use, increasing levels of THC in the blood of some of their drivers. We hope to see more of that information shared in our workshop, in our summit on March 15th. At NHTSA, we are very concerned because some of the evidence, which has been sent to Congress in our report to Congress on marijuana-impaired driving in June of last year, shows us that THC can lead to impairment such as we see with alcohol. Many people, we have seen evidence, are using both THC products or marijuana and alcohol, making it more difficult for law enforcement to detect and discern which substance they're using or is being used and how they should prosecute. So we have many challenges ahead of us. We are very much committed not only to short-term but to long-term strategies to combat the problem.
Are there tests that can determine if someone is under the influence of marijuana, similar to how the breathalyzer is used to detect impairment with alcohol?
The science is evolving. While I have seen several tests proposed, each test has its own strengths and weaknesses. And because of the nature of the substance is different than alcohol, we don't have, we have not evolved yet to the point where we have a certainty in the testing that we do with alcohol. But we hope to stimulate further research as part of our initiative to address drugged driving.
Would NHTSA be the federal agency that would bring to the nation's attention some sort of test that would be dispositive regarding marijuana?
We'd like to help, but of course there are many federal and state agencies that are involved in this journey of discovery. We are working with toxicologists and with other scientists at other federal agencies, but also at the state level. Again, some of the states have programs that have some learnings to share with us. So this is something where none of us are going to solve the problem alone. We're all going to work together, both in the science community and in the public policy community.
Do the states have better tests in this regard, several of the states?
Well, for roadside, I don't know that that is the case, but it's individual laboratories where I have met with scientists who are refining the protocols for testing blood levels. So as science is developed not in one place, but across a committed community. And again, that's why we're bringing everyone together, the experts, to share information with one another so we can identify best practices and gaps and move forward productively.
Would it be your agency that would take the lead in advising Congress what the potential increase in accidents, what that potential increase is in the various states that have attempted to legalize recreational marijuana?
We have information that could partially look at the sources of the increase in the states, but because we don't have a nationwide system for collecting that information, it would be conjecture at this point. But I intend to set as the goal a nationwide collection of information that could inform that.
Thank you. I look forward to continuing to work with you on this issue as the governor of New Jersey and our state legislature together debate the legalization of recreational marijuana. I am opposed to such legalization of recreational use. Given the unprecedented scope and complexity of the Takata recall, can you please provide the committee with some of the lessons learned and how we might improve completion rates in future recalls?
Absolutely. I would like to refer to the monitor report that was issued and is posted on our website this past November. the independent monitor at Takata has completed, together with NHTSA research, to understand what's working and what is not. Consumer response, consumer awareness and action is part of the puzzle here. And we learned from the monitor that consumers hear the word recall or they hear the word defect and they don't understand the sense of urgency. So one of the lessons learned is that not only reaching the consumers, but using language to help them understand the urgency of this recall is critical.
Thank you, and good luck to you in your important responsibilities, and I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. King, thank you for being here. Now, as we all know, NHTSA's fuel economy standards for model years 2022 to 2025 were originally set in 2012. In July 2016, NHTSA and EPA released a joint technical report finding that the standards in 2012 remained appropriate and that compliance would be easier and less costly to achieve than originally anticipated using a wide range of existing technologies. In other words, there is clear data-driven support for maintaining existing standards and even making them more stringent. Now, my time is limited and I've got lots of questions, so I'd appreciate if you would stick to brief yes or no responses a la John Dingell. Are you still planning to release a proposed rule by March 30th to finalize the 2022 through 2025 standards?
I would like to answer yes or no, but if I could clarify, we will propose, not finalize, but as required by law, we will propose, and yes, March 30th.
Yes, okay. Given the findings of the joint NHTSA and EPA technical report, will the proposed rule set out fuel economy standards that are at least as stringent as those promulgated in 2012?
We would be able to announce that at the proposal. At this time, we are engaged in the analysis.
So you don't
together
know
with
whether it's
EPA.
yes or no right now, is that correct?
That's right.
It has been reported that the rule may also revisit the fuel economy standard for model year 2021, but your correspondence to the committee dated January 9 states that your proposed standards for light vehicles model year 2022 through 2025. Yes or no, will 2021 be included?
I wouldn't be able to address the rulemaking in progress at this time, and I'm afraid I haven't seen that report.
Okay, you haven't? Oh, okay, we'll send it to you. Are you changing the model NHTSA uses to calculate fuel efficiency?
NHTSA always strives to keep its modeling updated and current, including the inputs and the data, and improving econometric methods.
Okay. Some have claimed that adjustments to the 2022 to 2025 standards are needed because consumers are buying larger vehicles like SUVs and light trucks rather than compact cars and electric vehicles. Again, yes or no responses, please. Aren't fuel economy standards based on the size or footprint of the vehicle sold? So a light truck does not need to achieve the same miles per gallon as a compact car, correct?
The fleet-wide average does include consideration of footprints.
Doesn't that mean that the exact mix of trucks and smaller cars that a manufacturer actually sells is already factored in? You said yes to that, right?
Manufacturers produce to meet consumer demand for different types of vehicles for different purposes.
Fleet-wide target. So couldn't the company meet its fleet-wide target selling only SUVs as long as they meet the fuel economy standard for the SUV footprint? Yes or no?
I would have to think about the math because they need to meet a fleet-wide average.
So you're not sure right now?
I would have to think about that. I have not seen a manufacturer choose to do so.
Okay, we'll check on that too. Let me just say this. It's very important that NHTSA continue to engage with the autonomous vehicle innovation that's taking place across the country. As part of NHTSA's second AV guidance, you put forward a template for AV developers to submit a safety self-assessment. How many safety self-assessments has NHTSA received?
We don't ask manufacturers to send them to us. We ask them to disclose them.
So you don't have any idea of numbers at all?
I am aware of 2, but we do not ask them to be submitted. They're not a document submitted to NHTSA. We ask that they be made public, and we are aware of 2, which we have linked on our website. We've created a dashboard so that we
Okay.
can make it easier
So
for people
you're
to
only aware of
find them.
2 right now?
That's right.
Okay. What does NHTSA learn? Have you learned anything from these assessments at all, from the 2?
I have actually. I've learned it's very important for us all to be in dialogue on this issue. I think each of the manufacturers is considering safety and would like to engage with others in learning from one another. So I see that we're in this journey
Good.
together.
Okay, I understand that this intention is to increase collaboration and build the public trust for AVs, which I strongly support. And I really believe that, as most people here on the committee believe, which is really important, the safety is number one. You know, the AV situation is getting so much now attention that I think there's a sense out there that the thought is that it's maybe safer than we think it is. So I really feel strongly that we should keep emphasizing safety, and anytime we talk about AVs, safety is emphasized. And I really think that if NHTSA has only received 2 as far as the assessments that we're talking about, as far as building public trust, I think that we really need to I feel that we need to encourage more, I think, collaboration as far as conversation. I think we need to have more public comment on this in a sense of understanding where this is all is. So anyway, I truly believe in this, in the midterm evaluation. Also, what we're talking about is autonomous vehicles. We really need vigorous conversation and debate. So thank you very much for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. The gentlelady yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Kentucky for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Welcome back to the committee. I appreciate it very much. And actually, Mr. Lance, my friend from New Jersey, hit a lot of the issues that I was going to talk about. And I look forward to the results of your roundtable and meeting on drug driving. As the move to recreational use of marijuana is moving down the road, there are a lot of serious issues. And hopefully we can bring it to the attention of the people. It's not just as simple and as a lot of people want to make it out to be. There are a lot of issues that need to be addressed. But I'll go to another interesting topic, tire wear, since you've already addressed that. So in the next 12 months, what progress does the department anticipate toward implementing the tire performance standards for fuel efficiency and wet traction?
Oh, very good. We have research underway, and so I expect we will have something hopefully soon, because we are in fact reviewing some of that research now. But we have several initiatives related to tires that are underway at NHTSA.
Also, I believe you're launching the web-based tire recall search tool. Do you know when that should be launched, or?
I'd be happy to provide more information. I will say it's not an area in which I have the level of detail I'd like to provide you. I'd like to make sure we get correct information to you.
Okay, thanks. Also, in September of last year, NHTSA released new guidance for self-driving vehicles, and a very proud and great Kentuckian, Secretary Chow, announced the agency is working on a version 3.0. Can you explain the approach? That's my old field artillery. I can't say, I have to say 0 when it's a digit. 3.0 will take in version 2.0 will interplay with the new guidance, So let me get back. Can you please explain the approach 3.0 will take in version 2.0 will interplay with the new guidance?
Very excited to explain that. Version 2.0 focused very much on automated driving systems in consumer cars, whereas 3.0 will be multimodal. I'll tell you what 3.0 will not do. It will not change, for example, the voluntary safety self-assessments that Congresswoman Matsui was just discussing. We still expect manufacturers to provide voluntary safety self-assessments as described in 2.0. 3.0 will expand the discussion to include other modes of transportation.
Okay, thank you. And can you please highlight significant dates moving forward with respect to the Takata recall that we and our constituents should be aware of, and when do you expect the recall to be complete?
We have posted on our website at NHTSA the dates when various ages or various risk categories of airbags will be recalled. Right now, the date that is top of mind is now. Because of the urgency of the recall announced on Monday with certain 2006 Ford vehicles, I would urge every consumer to check our website and know whether they have one of most airbags, save thousands of lives every year, or the ones that are not safe. I would like consumers to check, and if they're not getting the information they need from their dealership, to contact NHTSA immediately. The sense of urgency cannot be overstated with respect to vehicles covered by the Do Not Drive order. Any assistance in communicating that with your constituents would be greatly appreciated.
Thank you very much. And I have a couple minutes left, and maybe something's not your expertise, but I was wondering as Mr. Lance was talking, my understanding is that when, back to drug driving, that if somebody is pulled over and they're tested and they have the blood alcohol content, that makes, where they can prosecute that's not tested for drugs, because you don't need both, I guess, is impaired driving. That might be something in your roundtable to discuss, just for the information, data. Understand that if somebody's impaired, they're impaired, but would be nice to know how much of the drug is in the system as well. And I guess the question I was going to ask you, may not know that, it might not be your expertise, but if someone is drug driving, there's no alcohol, they're drug driving, they're impaired, so if somebody get pulled over for crossing a line or whatever, like would typically tip off an officer, would they fail a field sobriety test? I know most of it is breathalyzers and blood that goes to court, but you get there first by not being able to touch your nose or standing on 1 foot or whatever the stuff that says you're just not capable of driving. Does somebody that's drug driving on marijuana, would they fail, not opioids, but marijuana, fail that?
So I'm drawing now upon my little-known background. I was in law enforcement 30 years ago when I was in much better physical shape than I am today. We have, at the state level, different laws in different parts of the country, and so how the laws are categorized is different by state. I was a law enforcement officer in California, and I have spoken with people there and can describe that a little bit. Impaired driving is illegal. Impaired driving is not only a risk to health and safety, but it is illegal in most of the country. When an officer identifies an impaired driver, an officer is very experienced and well-trained in the fairly familiar pattern of identifying an alcohol-impaired driver. We have a number of tools to train and prepare officers to assess for drug impairment, but there are so many different drugs. Sometimes people are taking drugs together or with alcohol, which then confuses the symptoms and makes it harder for the officer to identify what exactly he's dealing with. So yes, because the training, I think every officer in the United States is very likely to be trained rigorously in alcohol-impaired driving. We have A-RIDE program and DRE programs that provide that expertise with respect to drug impairment identification. It is not universal across the nation, however. In addition to identifying the signs and symptoms of impairment in a driver, we also have the challenge of prosecuting. So the officer is collecting information at a vehicle stop that he will use, he or she, in my case, that I would use in providing information to prosecute. The critical step in how to use that information in prosecuting when we don't have the legal framework, maybe we don't have the field test that we have for alcohol, those are all things that don't exist yet in a rigorous way across the country. But the good news, there are certain jurisdictions that have innovated. The County of Orange in California has combined forces, law enforcement and the district attorney's office and the laboratories to figure out how they can make the pieces work together and develop best practices. They're now training other parts of the state and hopefully soon the country. So we aren't as good at it as we are with alcohol, but I know we can get better quickly, and we will learn a lot, and we can conquer this problem together.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm here to support what you guys are trying to do. Thank you.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Lara, and also I'd like to thank Ranking Member Schakowsky for having this National Highway Safety Administration hearing. Appreciate this opportunity, and thank you, Deputy Administrator King, for coming today and answering our questions. I'm happy to be addressing a fellow Californian, and could you help us clarify, what's the status of the department getting a new administrator? How's that coming along? Can you update us?
The president has not yet identified a nominee, but I look forward to learning also who my new boss will be. Meanwhile, the department does have a strong leader, and that leader is here before you today, ready for your questions.
Okay. Now, your status right now is deputy administrator. At one time, you were acting administrator?
That's right. Under the Vacancies Act, the title acting administrator is only allowed for a certain period of time. However, as deputy administrator, I do fill all of the functions of the administrator, so I'm essentially, I'm acting as acting, although the title is not applied under the Vacancies Act.
Mm-hmm. And how long has the department been without an administrator?
There has not been an administrator nominated in the administration. I have been there since September 25th.
Okay. So it was January of 2007, January 21st of 2017, or when was it that the administration, the actual administrator position was vacant?
That's right, January of last year.
Oh, okay.
We have had in place, acting as deputy, our executive director, who's an outstanding professional with years of experience in transportation, and an outstanding, strong team, and of course, the leadership of the Department of Transportation.
Now, having a permanent administrator would be helpful to the department as a whole, right? I mean, hopefully we'll see that soon.
I look forward to hearing the president's nomination. I understand that there's a great deal of work ahead of us, but there is a team that is strong. I believe I am a strong leader, and I look forward to working with you. So hopefully, neither you nor the public will feel any difference whether or not it is myself acting as administrator or whether it is myself serving my new boss when the president identifies the nominee and that nominee is confirmed.
Yeah, I certainly respect that that's within the full purview of the president. However, we do have tremendous responsibilities that I'll outline some of them right now within that department. There's no question that NHTSA has a tremendous opportunity to shape the safe implementation of highly autonomous vehicles in the next few years. The United States is on the brink of an important change in how we own and interact with vehicles. As stewards of traffic safety, NHTSA has the responsibility to work with Congress to make sure that these next steps are taken in a safe manner. But any guidance or regulation we develop of the federal level inevitably impacts state and local regulations. So we must make sure that what we do in Washington, D.C. is responsive to what our officials back home are going to have to deal with at the state and local level. I used to be in the California State Assembly and also on the LA City Council, so I have experienced firsthand what it's like when federal policy works well and when it does not. During the development of the Self-Drive Act that was passed in the House last year, I was particularly interested in making sure that the legislation ensured collaboration with our counterparts at the state and local level. The bill includes legislation I introduced to form a highly automated vehicle advisory council at NHTSA with a diverse group of members, including from state and local authorities. The bill passed the House, and we hope that the Senate will take it up soon. But in the meantime, what's NHTSA doing to make sure that states and localities are involved in the development of autonomous vehicle guidance and rulemaking?
We are communicating a lot. I am very much honored to work with my state partners. I agree with you. It's critical that we work together and learn from one another, and that we not be developing things in a vacuum without consultation. As I had mentioned earlier, 2/3 of our budget is in fact grant monies with states, both because of our behavioral programs together, but also because of the challenges we confront together, not only with drugged driving, but with emerging technologies. We are at all levels in frequent discussion with the states, myself also being someone from the field, also from the West, which can sometimes feel distant from Washington, D.C. I know those flights feel long some days. It's a constant dialogue, and we're very sensitive to the views of our state partners.
Ms. King, what keeps you from being a candidate to be the permanent administrator?
That's very kind of you to ask. The president will make his choice, and I will defer to his choice. I look forward to having.
But on a strict basis, there's no qualification scenario that would prevent you from being nominated, correct?
I do not.
No, I just, for those watching in the White House, I don't want them to think that you're soliciting that position.
He's trying to be very diplomatic.
I know, but but technically speaking, there's nothing right now that would preclude you from being a nominee on a technical basis, correct?
I certainly don't believe there's anything as stringent as the peace officer standards and training of jumping over a 6-foot wall, as I did many years ago in the state of California to become a law enforcement officer.
Okay.
But honestly, Congressman Cardenas, that is not a question that I've addressed because it's not my area of expertise nor my responsibility. But I'd be happy to get back to you with more detail on that.
Nor is it a comfortable place to be. I didn't mean to embarrass you, but I just wanted to make sure that there was nothing that precluded that from happening. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Californians are frank.
Thank you very much. The gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from West Virginia for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Administrator, for being here today. I heard earlier you say several times that you didn't have enough data to answer some of the questions because particularly about drug-related accidents. And now that it's been revealed that what was the statistic, 43% of fatal accidents in 2015 were drug-related as compared to 37% alcohol-related. My curiosity is how that relates. We may not have the answer here, as you're saying. What's happening in Europe and elsewhere around the world? Are they finding similar to that? Because the reports I've gotten from Europe is that alcohol is still by far the prevalent cause of accidents, not drugs. What's bringing that about in the United States?
There are two parts to that question, if I understood your question, Congressman McKinley. One of them is what we are seeing in Europe, and one of them is what we are seeing here. Did I understand correctly?
Yes, what can we learn from Europe? That Europe has been able to get control so that its drug is not the drug-related preponderant amount of accidents caused by drugs, but we still now, ours has been logarithmically increasing. What are they doing right, or are we doing wrong?
There are many dimensions to that. It's I'll say, not an area of formal publication at NHTSA, but I can speak to my own experience and knowledge, which is that, first of all, the use of drugs, in particular illicit drugs, tends to be regional, even within the United States. And the second is that the use of transportation may also be very regional. In Europe, we often see communities that have a different relationship with their infrastructure. There may be more walkable, more drivable. There's lower rates of car ownership and higher rates of public transit use, so there may be more alternatives available.
I'd like to pursue that further with you, but also in your role that you've been with the department, and now in your role as the deputy, what keeps you up at night? What do you think is the biggest problem you're facing for the administration?
The thing that keeps me up at night is how to help consumers understand the risks of the airbags that are on the do not drive list or the do not drive recall issued on Monday. It's very important that consumers understand whether or not they have a safe, life-saving airbag in their car. Again, the safe, life-saving airbags save thousands of lives per year, but there are some few that can injure and they can maim and they can kill, and we have consumers who may be unaware. The fact that many of these vehicles are older means that the consumers may not be as likely to have a relationship with their dealership or with the auto manufacturer. We have been working with the manufacturers in their outreach to the consumers, and we're finding different ways to reach consumers. But what keeps me up at night is that there may be people who don't know, they're not understanding the urgency of the do not drive recall.
Thank you. The final question is, I think it was your answer back to Guthrie. I think it opened some curiosity on my part, which is the mechanics. It's one thing when someone's driving the car down the road and they can be tested for alcohol when they're impaired, they're weaving. If they're weaving and they're drug-related and pulled over, the only test I heard was a blood test. We're certainly not going to do a blood test on someone on the highway. What's the mechanical part? Someone is, for an officer is assuming they're impaired and he pulls them over, but there's no testing device. Do they allow them to continue? Do they give them a warning? Or do they stop them if they feel in their heart they're impaired because of drugs? What happens mechanically?
I believe that may differ regionally and depending on the officer's training. I can assure you that at NHTSA we have research underway in our research program.
What's happening now? The drugs are out there. We're having problems right now. Are they releasing them to continue driving?
Some forms of impairment are very similar to alcohol, even though they may have other causes, and that certainly would be captured by the standard field sobriety test that officers are using today. Officers collect evidence of impairment and take that information. So there is the field sobriety tests that are used today would identify signs of impairment. Although designed for alcohol, they could detect other forms of impairment. But we're devising new we are working on research to identify field sobriety tests that can be used for other substances to determine whether there even is a difference.
I hear you. I'm dealing with it today, the now. That's what I'm just curious about whether it's going to hold up in court if we don't have any background on this, how that's going to hold up a year from now.
I think I'm going to have some good news for you because my conversations with the geographies that are getting ahead of this, they're having some great successes, and I'm looking forward to learning more about them and making sure that we all can learn from them and adopt their best practices.
Thank you very much. I yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our Deputy Administrator. Following up on my colleague and good friends from West Virginia, what keeps me up at night is that I get these cards about that I need to take them into my dealer, and nobody can repair them. And so, what are we going to do? Is it some reason that maybe the dealers are not getting reimbursed, or is it's just that they don't have the to be able to fix these airbags that are in our current vehicles?
When a vehicle is, when a car owner is asked to come and have the replacement, there should be adequate supply. There should be adequate supply of airbags to replace any unsafe airbags. I would like anyone who does not hear from their dealership that they can get the active recall remediated immediately to contact NHTSA at 888-327-4236.
Okay, so there's a way we can do that because, like I said, it's almost like a joke sometimes. My constituents say I'll get that, but I call and there's not available, and then I'll get another card, 5 months later, and they're still not available. But they're supposed to be available at our dealerships.
The recall, because this is the largest and most complex automotive recall in history, we are staging by risk. So it may be that they're receiving a notification that there will later be a request for them to come in, but the vehicles that need to have a replacement now, there is supply available. There should be supply available. If not, contact NHTSA immediately.
Is there, on your website, a list of those particular vehicles? Is there a requirement to send out that card for something that's immediately like that, instead of someday we'll get our new airbags?
I have one of those cards too, and my airbag has already been replaced. So again, 50 million airbags. It's such a large and complex program.
I know.
It's, I understand the efforts to notify may have created confusion in some, but www.nhtsa.gov/recall, enter the VIN, folks, and find out. Every time I go to my dealer, I ask them, are you sure? So I know that the dealerships are also very attentive to this, but I encourage people to reach out to NHTSA, to call us, and to make sure they're speaking with their dealership and taking care of the problem. And I'm delighted to hear that you and your constituents are attentive to the issue. As I mentioned, what keeps me up at night is that people aren't aware.
And I will share the NHTSA website, and we'll put it on. I hope other members will too have the same problem. My other question is, in 2015, Representative Mullen and I sponsored a provision on the FAST Act that allows small volume cars companies to produce up to 325 replica cars in a year for the U.S. market and 5,000 for the export market. These are brand new vehicles that look like vintage cars, like classic Cobras, Mustangs. And in our area, I have a DeLorean factory in my district and that's why I was interested in that bill, because the owner of that DeLorean inventory said, we could actually expand this probably with 120 more employees. In Texas, we don't do a lot of car manufacturing up in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, so I'd like to have them in our district. NHTSA had until December 2016 to issue any necessary regulations needed to allow these companies to start producing replicas vehicles. The only assessing regulation of allowing companies to register with NHTSA and file an annual report. These companies have already made sizable investments and are ready to go to work. It's important that they are able to register with NHTSA in the production immediately in accordance with the law. I'd ask you, when is that going to happen?
Thank you. If I first of all may thank you for your letter in the fall. I was pleased to have your letter and pleased to reply. We have looked into using guidance, but we have a rulemaking coming out in this year, and so I look forward to hearing your constituents and others to comment on that rulemaking. We should see that by summer.
Okay, so by the summer of 2018.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. The gentleman yields back the balance of his time. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Florida for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. Thank you for your testimony today. Appreciate it very much. Ms. King, I introduced H.R. 3413, which was eventually rolled into the Self-Drive Act, which brings stakeholders together to ensure we maximize mobility benefits for senior citizens. How do you see self-driving vehicles improving the lives of senior citizens?
Thank you for your question. I think we all understand not only the safety benefits, but we're very, very excited about the opportunity to add mobility to certain communities as a result of the innovative technologies. The aging community, of which I am slowly becoming a part, is clearly one of the communities that can benefit from self-driving cars, or forgive me, automated driving systems. So we look forward to seeing the technologies evolve safely and test safely so that we can see that mobility and safety promise come to our streets.
Okay, thank you. Next question, given significant mobility benefits of self-driving cars, you just mentioned that, how is NHTSA focusing on these certain segments of our population, such as those with disabilities?
Do you, in the context of automated driving systems specifically?
Yes.
Very good. So in our discussions of the automated driving system promise, we're hosting many dialogues and taking comments to understand not only the benefits but the concerns. In particular, one of the things the research tells us, and I think many of us read this in the newspaper reports, is that consumers have questions and concerns about the emerging technology. That's not surprising because the technology is emerging and it's very hard for all of us to understand a thing we haven't experienced or seen yet. So we are in dialogue with many of the manufacturers. Part of that dialogue is as described in a Vision for Safety 2.0 to help us all understand where the sources of confusion are. We find that terminology may be one of them. We all use different terms. A moment ago I used a term I shouldn't have. I said self-driving car. We speak about automated driving systems. But there are so many terms out there, right? Level 3, level 4, self-driving car, driverless car, automated driving system. Even the terminology is confusing. It's confusing to me at times. We need to make sure we are adopting a common set of terminology that makes it easier for us to have meaningful, rich discussion with our communities, with state and local governments, as well as with manufacturers. So this is one of the things we're learning, is that as the technology develops, we all need to circle up on some of the terminology so we have more effective dialogue together as the technology evolves safely.
So do you envision a person, let's say a senior or someone with disabilities like myself, I have visual difficulties, having access to a automated car instead of a self-driving car in the near future? How far are we from something like that? Now, you know, it's something that's affordable, obviously.
If there's one thing I learned during my time as a research scientist at the Old Bell Labs, is that the development of technology goes at the pace it needs to go. So I would be hesitant to forecast, because what consumers will adopt, what the technology is ready for in a safe deployment or safe development path, is something that's very difficult to predict. Certainly it is my hope that the technology is safely tested and deployed to provide the access to mobility for all members of our community. But at NHTSA, as the leader of NHTSA, I am committed to making sure that the testing and deployment is safe and that we have an effective dialogue to ensure that that is so.
Oh, of course, safety is more important than anything. Let's see, I know you touched upon the opioid issue, so I'll go on to the next question. Can you please explain how consumers can determine whether they are affected by recall? And I know that Representative Green touched on this as well, but if you could expand, I would, please, because this is very informative for our constituents. Again, can you please explain how consumers can determine whether they are affected by a recall, and offer other recommendations as to what consumers should do if they find themselves affected by a recall?
Thank you for asking. www.nhtsa.gov. That is our website, the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, www.nhtsa.gov. One will see there, right at the top of our webpage, a recalls banner. One can click and go in and enter a vehicle identification number and see any outstanding recalls on one's vehicle. I routinely check it. I have become clearly much more sensitive to the urgency of recalls since I have been at NHTSA. One can enter one's email address and get an alert to remain always current on outstanding recalls. For those who may not have a computer or feel comfortable doing so, a consumer can call the dealership. They can call the manufacturer and they can have it checked. I do use a dealership for my own car, and I find it helpful that they keep a file and they'll tell me whether or not there's anything outstanding, and they can describe it to me if I have any questions. But the key is that consumers find out whether or not they have whether they have an outstanding recall, and if it is an urgent recall or any recall, they should act. But in particular, the do not drive recalls announced on Monday are absolutely critical. Do not drive, call the dealership, a tow truck will come, the recall remedy is free.
Give us the number again, please, for those who are watching.
Absolutely. Let's see, where did I put it? I looked up from my piece of paper. I would like, if you don't mind, if we could post it on your website. I would recommend people go to www.nhtsa.gov, and I seem to have misplaced my phone number in my sense of urgency that consumers find out about the recalls outstanding on their vehicles.
Thank you very much, and we want to put that on our websites as well, so that consumers can have access. So thank you very much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Gentleman's time has expired, and the chair now recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank our witness for being here as well. Thank you for your work. Thank you for your service. I want to ask you to touch on a couple of different rulemakings that I believe NHTSA was supposed to have begun, and just ask for an update on that process if I can. So first off, with regards to tires, the FAST Act mandated that NHTSA write a rule to ensure that tire pressure monitoring systems cannot be overridden, reset, or recalibrated in such a way that the system will no longer detect when inflation pressure has fallen below significantly underinflated level. NHTSA has yet to take any action on that requirement. So, Ms. King, I was hoping you could shed some light on when NHTSA will issue a final rule on that tire pressure monitoring system.
Congressman Kennedy, we have begun work on all requirements in the FAST Act, including the tire rules. It is on our regulatory agenda. We are making progress forward, and we look forward to taking next steps as described in our regulatory agenda. I believe we have a proposed rule step before we go to the final rule step, and I look forward to discussing that with you.
And ma'am, do you have any, I realize I'm putting you on the spot a little bit here, do you have any idea as that months, is that how many months, how long till we think we're getting to that process?
I would like to consult the regulatory agenda and send you the date that we have currently scheduled. I myself have been receiving information about that rulemaking, and I'll say myself becoming smarter about the requirements in the tire pressure monitoring system rulemaking. So
thank you, ma'am.
I know it's something that's under active discussion, not only from us, but from those interested parties.
So if your staff could follow up with that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you. Similarly, with the seatbelt reminder rulemaking, MAP 21 required that NHTSA initiate a rulemaking proceeding to require rear seatbelt reminder systems. Again, my understanding is that NHTSA has not taken any public action on that statutory mandate. And in fact, the agency has been sued by safety advocates for its failure to take action. Can you bring us up to date on whether NHTSA has initiated a rulemaking proceeding on the rear seatbelt reminders?
Again, I'd be happy to follow up with you on the date consulting the regulatory agenda. It's clearly very important to us to protect all occupants of the car. Many of the rulemakings addressing vehicle safety, we do research before we issue a final rulemaking to make sure we consider any unintended consequences of the rulemaking.
And so, Ms. King, has the process started on that yet, or is it underway? Where are we in it?
I would be happy to send more information about the status. I'll say, unlike the tire pressure monitoring system, I personally have not been engaged in some of the technical details, but I also have a large team that works very diligently on all of the requirements under the FAST Act. I know work has been initiated on all of them, and I'm happy to provide more detail about the stage of the work.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. Finally, the vehicle-to-vehicle rulemaking. NHTSA has issued a notice of proposed rulemaking for vehicle-to-vehicle communications in January of last year with comments due in April of last year. This rulemaking is particularly anticipated by many stakeholders. We've heard from a number of those stakeholders that their plans are on hold until a final rule is issued. Can you give us any guidance as to what timeline might be for that as well?
Absolutely. I think we share an enthusiasm for the safety benefits that vehicle-to-vehicle technologies can offer. We received, as you know, a large number of comments, very technical comments on the proposed rulemaking, which we are going through now. The comments had, first of all, technical matter and diverse comments. So we look forward to learning from them, and we certainly hope that the dedicated spectrum will in fact be reserved and applied to vehicle safety technologies.
So I appreciate that, and obviously safety being a primary concern. Push you a little bit here. Again, months, how many, where are we? You want to follow up again, kind of how long, what's that time frame look like?
We have a commitment to safety and to getting it right. When it comes to complex technologies with a safety relationship, I would commit that we get it right and then we move forward in a way that doesn't pick winners and losers, but in fact is going to optimize the vehicle safety opportunity to the American public. It's difficult to put a timeline on getting it right, particularly with technical matter, but you have my commitment to work with your staff, to remain engaged, to hear from stakeholders, and make sure that we move forward in a way that assures safety in the best possible manner with respect to vehicle-to-vehicle technologies.
Thank you. I've got one last question, but given the time, I'll happily submit that for the record. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Indiana for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ms. King, for your service. You know, I think one of the things, I'll just make a general comment, what you're hearing today, and you're well aware of this, is that at federal agencies, it's not necessarily about the money, it's bureaucracy, right? And you've seen the level of frustration of members of Congress on both sides. I mean, what can be controversial about knowing whether there's a child left in the back seat of a car, right, and have some notification of that? I mean, the only controversy is how much it's going to cost to put it in the cars, right? We all know that. And so it's a frustrating thing, because if I had a dime for every time I hear from federal agencies, this is not not to you personally, that you know, we're in the process, you know, legal's looking at it, and this, I wouldn't have to have a job. I'd have, you know, enough dimes to not have a job. So I just want you to know, and the public to know, that there's a high level of frustration amongst not only NHTSA but other agencies, and since this is about safety, and I was a physician before, and others on this committee are concerned about safety, the level of frustration is pretty high, especially when we hear this in hearings across the spectrum about, you know, these rules need to be out there, they need to be done more quickly, not only for safety reasons, but to give an efficient regulatory framework for industry, right? And so in that vein, you know, with the CAFE standards, for example, and, you know, and EPA hasn't indicated a timeline for their revised final determination or subsequent proposal rulemaking, I think industry is in the interest of efficient regulatory framework. We need to get going on this. And so, you know, I don't expect you to comment on that. The one thing is, you know, I'm interested in the line of questioning about THC. I mean, I was a physician. There's evidence to show that chronic THC use in the developing brain, for example, young people all the way into their mid to late 20s, has long-term cognitive changes. And so in that vein, for recreational use, I'm against legalization, although there are specific potential medical reasons for having THC available, although it's usually the CBG oil, the CBG extract that actually has the medical benefit. It seems to me that we need to work more quickly on determining a national standard on what constitutes impairment as it relates to THC. I mean, we have states legalizing recreational marijuana, and that's their right. At the federal level, as you know, is still a Schedule I drug. So, I mean, I'm interested. You said there's a roundtable discussion amongst federal agencies on this issue, but you know, we need to do more than that. I mean, what are your thoughts? I mean, we need to, like, a serious working group that meets to try to determine a legal standard. Okay, you know, if there's a field sobriety test, people beat that in court.
mean, you just get a lawyer and you go to court and you say there's no scientific evidence I was impaired, and you question the integrity of the officers or whatever you do, right? And you can win that. You can't do that if you have a blood alcohol level or you have you blow into a breathalyzer and it says you're 0.1. You can do that, and so. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, I think we need. How did we get to the 0.08 in some states? I mean, what was the process of getting to determining? Hey, if you have more than that when you blow a breathalyzer, you're impaired.
Responding to your question about the drug impaired driving initiative, I absolutely agree. There should be more, and it's not. The meeting we have on March 15th is meant to be a summit. It's kicking off. We're calling it a call to action. It is a call to action. It is not the only action. What our goal is with the Drug Impaired Driving Initiative is to set a strategy, to set a path, and to articulate a vision of what good looks like to answer exactly the questions that you're describing. We have in place a framework and a system for alcohol-impaired driving, and we do not have that level of...
Right, how did we get there with alcohol?
How did we get there with alcohol?
Yeah.
I was not a part of that process.
Well, I know it's been decades, right?
Right, so I look forward to having best practices from that dialogue. Many of the experts we are bringing into the summit on March 15th are those who've been engaged in this discussion for some time. So I look forward to learning from them and to sharing those learnings out. But you have my commitment that as part of the initiative, the Drug Impaired Driving Initiative, we will be considering all forms of impairment, and we'll be thinking how can we leverage the learnings of the alcohol-impaired driving experience, expand them to drug impairment, and make sure that everybody understands any form of impaired driving.
I mean, we just need a national legal standard, right? I mean, law enforcement, and the courts, if you have a test for THC, you go and you refuse a test for drug test, whatever. If you refuse a breathalyzer or whatever, you get we need a legal test, and I just don't see that happening at the state level because they don't have the resources probably to determine that. I mean, just as we have, even though ultimately they may decide where they want to be on this, it just seems like time is a factor here. We should have been doing this decades ago. The reality is, in my opinion, as a medical professional, a lot of these things, it's based on money, right? I mean, it's just based on if we determine that here's this legal standard for THC, then we're going to get pushback from states that have legalized it because a bunch of their people are going to be getting arrested for impaired driving, and that's just the way it's going to be. So, with that, Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I too apologize for not being here. We do have another hearing going on upstairs. And I apologize, Ms. King, if this has already been asked. Obviously, you and Dr. Bouchon were discussing the issue of impaired drivers. And I am from a state that has not legalized marijuana, but I recognize that other states have. And so this is a concern that is, I think, something we're going to encounter with greater frequency. And I think even in your testimony this morning, you referenced the combination of, say, alcohol with another substance. And in fact, we had just such an incident occur in the district that I represent a couple of years ago, a young man who was crossing probably outside of the crosswalk, a fairly busy street, and yes, it was after dark, was struck by an individual, young man driving a Jeep. And the man in the crosswalk died, and the young man who's driving the Jeep, I think, had a 0.04% alcohol and a positive qualitative test for marijuana. No charges were brought. So his mother comes to see me and says, what in the world is going on here? Not that she had a vendetta against the young man driving the Jeep, but she's lost a son. It does seem like there possibly was some component of impairment of the person who was operating the vehicle, and where is the protection for her son in that exchange? So I'd just be interested in some of the things that you're thinking about and doing that, even if even if it's education for our local district attorneys, that be mindful of the fact that, yes, they're under the legal limit for alcohol, but a positive test for marijuana may be difficult to associate a temporal relationship, but on the other hand, it may have a bearing, and this may be a case that does need to go to the grand jury and not just simply dismissed as an unfortunate accident. So let me hear your thoughts on that.
Thank you very much, Congressman Burgess. I look forward to continuing to work with you on this. Although I've only been at NHTSA, it's now 20 and a half weeks. I believe today is my 20 and a half week anniversary. Already in my time at NHTSA, I have spent 2 visits to the state of California, where they, in the fall, have been educating me about the work that's being done in the laboratories, in the DUI courts. I've met with prosecutors who are finding ways to prosecute despite the difficulty in actually having good, robust laboratory results that are temporally appropriate for determining impairment in a prosecution. What I have found is, yes, we have a ways to go, but yes, we have some best practices to share. What I have found at NHTSA is that we have pockets of activity in different places. In the county of Orange in California, again, in Congresswoman Walter's district has a great deal of learnings for us, but other areas as well where we can both leverage the best practices, but there are still gaps. None of us, no one alone is going to solve the problem, and none of us alone have the answers. My role at NHTSA, I'm not a physician, and I certainly have not had a history of working only on this issue, but at NHTSA, our concern for safe driving gives us the opportunity to convene and to bring together the dialogue and to foster a community that can leverage our strengths together. I want to make sure that the best practices are identified so that we can all start using them to save lives today, and that we set a strong vision for where we need to be as a country, identifying the gaps and identifying where we are on progress towards those gaps so we can close them. It's unacceptable that we would see people, understanding with our nation's history that impairment kills. It's unacceptable that we would allow continued impairment from illicit drugs to injure families on our roadways. It's heartbreaking. You described a story. We all feel the pain of needless loss at every life, in particular around needless impaired driving.
So there was a young man who came to see me whose parents were lost in an automobile accident where the driver of the truck that hit them was impaired, and even admitted the impairment. His frustration was, even though this individual went to jail, it was for a 3-month time for driving with a suspended license. The impairment did not even enter into the prosecution, and that's the thing I think we've got to address. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll yield back.
Thank you very much. The gentleman yields back. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. King, for being here today. And I appreciate NHTSA's recent announcement to launch its drugged driving initiative. Law enforcement, we know, must have the tools it needs to determine impaired driving, particularly drug impairment. Last Congress, we passed the FAST Act, which included language I championed that required NHTSA to study marijuana-impaired driving and how it affects individuals behind the wheel. Additionally, that study asked NHTSA to work on a roadside test for impairment, including a device capable of measuring marijuana levels. My colleagues have also raised this issue, but I'd like to get some more of your thoughts beyond addressing the legal limits of the challenges we face in addressing drug impairment on our roadways and what steps that Congress can take to start addressing this issue.
First of all, Congresswoman, may I thank you for your support of the marijuana report to Congress that was submitted last year. That report was, in fact, one of the pieces that educated me and caused me, as I stepped into my role at NHTSA, to take on the Drug Impaired Driving Initiative. So thank you very much for your leadership on this issue that's of such critical importance at the federal, state, and local levels. I do not, at this point, have a recommendation for congressional action because there is what is known and there is what is not known. I don't feel as though there has been a comprehensive assessment of the gaps across all drug-impaired driving. We have, as a nation, spoken about marijuana-impaired driving, THC products. We've spoken about opioid-impaired driving. But in fact, the laboratories, and I'll cite the crime lab of Orange County in your own community, they're testing now for 46 different substances, I believe. And what I hear from the toxicologists in your community is that not only is it a challenge that people may have several substances on board at the same time, or that they may be masking with alcohol, but in fact that the specific chemical substances change. If it's a synthetic substance, the formula changes, and that means that the chemical test the toxicologist must apply, that will change too. So forgive me for getting in the weeds a little bit too much there, but thanks to the work that you encouraged that was submitted last year, and thanks to the skills and the patience of those who've been educating me where the rubber hits the road, where the risks are in the field, I have taken on that commitment to figure out what are those gaps in partnership with the stakeholders, state and local governments. We'll see what do we know, what do we not know, and then from there set a vision for a course for the future, which I think it would be appropriate for us at that time to get back to you with what we think the gaps are and where working with Congress is absolutely a critical piece. If I might add, apologize, I have a great deal of enthusiasm for the subject. Public awareness is already identified as a gap. People know that they should not drive with alcohol impairment. But in speaking with the local law enforcement officials, it sounds as though our communities may not be as aware that it's not okay to drive buzzed. We have at NHTSA public awareness campaigns. Through our partnerships with states, we're trying to raise awareness, but simply helping people understand that driving impaired under drugs can kill. That is an immediate gap that we know that we can address today. I would seek your support and partnership on that. It's important we educate the public to drive safely when they are ready to drive and not when they are impaired.
I think that's a really good point, because for so many years it was all about drunk driving. And now we've entered sort of a new phase, if you will, on this whole marijuana issue, that we have to re-educate our people in this country to make sure that they understand. So that's a really good point. I also introduced H.R. 3405, which was included in the Self-Drive Act, that expands the FAST Act testing exemption to new entrants developing safe driving technology. Can you please speak to how important it is to maintain a level playing field for any type of company that wishes to test this technology?
Yes. And thank you very much for that provision. We think it's very important that the emerging technologies be developed by the people who are able to do it best. We think in this time of a very revolutionary changes in automotive safety technology that there may be ideas coming from the traditional auto manufacturers, but there also may be ideas coming from academia or other organizations as well. So we think it's very important that we have an environment that welcomes safety driving technologies from wherever it comes as we go through this journey of seeing safe deployment and testing on our roadways.
One last question. In your testimony, you state, we are currently undergoing transportation transformation. And if we delay action on these changes, such as self-driving vehicles, do you believe investment and innovation will be moved abroad?
As an economist, I am formally trained as an economist, and I believe that the investment will generally go where the return is. And so I would like to see that the investment in these potentially life-changing technologies remain here in the United States, that we have, that we maintain a leadership role in automotive technology.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. Gentlelady's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. King, I introduced H.R. 3411, legislation that was eventually rolled into the Self-Drive Act, which brings together stakeholders to make recommendations on cybersecurity for testing and deployment of self-driving vehicles. Can you share with me your observations on the importance of cybersecurity concerns and the role that NHTSA will be playing?
I would be very happy to. Thank you for the question. Cybersecurity is clearly very important to us as we become an increasingly digital world, and automotive technology is a part of that. One of the roles that NHTSA is playing is in encouraging the conversation through the Auto ISAC, the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is a collaborative group of auto manufacturers and cybersecurity experts and also suppliers into that industry, developing best practices for sharing information. We did at NHTSA issue a guidance in 2016, which we're very proud of. We've also asked that manufacturers disclose in their voluntary safety self-assessments how they consider cybersecurity. I would add a key component of this, and my own personal message on cybersecurity is that Cybersecurity is not the domain of highly technical experts alone, but in fact, cybersecurity is a concern to all of us. We see from our experience, whether it be in our home computers or in our phones, that there may be vulnerabilities that are driven by users. And so part of the cybersecurity journey will be to educate all of us to be thoughtful about how we use our devices or our cars and make sure that we all are sensitive and partners in the cybersecurity journey. But NHTSA is very excited about the Auto ISAC in particular and looks forward to having more to share out of that effort.
What's your expectation on deliverables from ISAC?
On deliverables?
Yeah.
As I mentioned, we do have a guidance that was issued in 2016.
2016, right.
Yes, and we are now expecting to see more voluntary safety self-assessments from manufacturers, which will describe their how they address cybersecurity. What we see during this time of rapid technology change is that the deliverables evolve depending on the need and out of the dialogue. So I expect to see more work out of the Auto ISAC. I expect to see manufacturers not only issuing their voluntary safety self-assessments, but perhaps updating them to reflect what they learn as the technology evolves and as they learn from one another. And then NHTSA, of course, will stand ready to continue to add or shape the conversation and to continue to drive the importance of this issue going forward.
Now that is separate and apart from the new safety data initiative that will integrate data on highway design, data, known crashes, so the DOT will be able to analyze and estimate crash risk. Is that correct? That's a separate initiative?
That's right. We have two initiatives actually at the department, one of them the safety data pilot programs, and one of them specifically with respect to the automated driving systems, the automated driving systems data pilot programs or pilot dialogue as well. Both of them are intended to help us modernize the way we think about the use of data. With automated driving systems, we are thinking about data-driven safety. We think about our role at NHTSA as a facilitator. We think about where can we start small and then scale up in order to coordinate the use of data, reduce costs, and improve the effectiveness of data for managing safety risks. The pilot programs are an effort to understand whether the rich sources of data that are not talking together today can be better leveraged to forecast risks on our highways so that we can operate more safely.
What's your expectation on, how do you view V2V technology maturing? And at what point in time do you think that we will see either more guidance from NHTSA or sort of whole-scale buy-in from the automotive industry? Much is there, I think, but it's not. There's a little bit of, I don't want to say tension, but could you just share your observations on what you see moving forward there?
It's a very interesting time. We all recognize the value of the safety benefits that can come from V2V technology. I don't know whether tension is the wrong word in that we see technologies emerging and hopefully learning from one another. The critical thing here is to make sure that as we progress, given the importance of the safety technologies to our roadways and to our drivers and consumers, that the technologies evolve in a way that provides the benefit that we all hope for. At the Department of Transportation, we'd like to avoid picking winners and losers. Right now, there is a vigorous discussion among, I'll say, the more technical people and the suppliers and manufacturers around, I'll say, two key technologies in particular. I encourage that discussion, even if it does bring tension, because we need to get the answer right for the nation.
Sure.
So,
and before I go back, I would agree. I'm not sure tension was the right word. I think that obviously there's a little bit of uncertainty, and that may owe itself to the fact that the technologies are still evolving, and we don't want to cement things too early. So I think that I appreciate you for coming up with a better word than the word that I used in the premise of my question. I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.
The gentleman's time's expired, and at this time, seeing that there are no other members asking to ask questions today, Ms. King, we really appreciate your testimony today, and you kind of walked around the entire spectrum of what we're looking at, when a lot of the issues that the members had today about safety, cybersecurity, issues with THC when I was in the Ohio legislature for 11 years and chairing the judiciary and criminal committees there. These are issues that we dealt with, especially when you're talking about THC and the question what was going to, when you're looking at drug driving and not drunk driving, but also when you're talking about what you're looking at today with the DUID and also about masking. And so there's a lot of things going on out there. I know in Ohio, on some of our roads, we got signs up to report to the Highway Patrol about people that are driving, drug driving right now. So there's a lot of things out there, and we appreciate your testimony today, but we expected that from somebody who's a former E&C'er. So we appreciate you being with us today. I have a letter a document that's been submitted for the record by unanimous consent, a letter from the Center for Safety, from Auto Safety. And if there's no objection, the letter is accepted without objection. Pursuant to committee rules, I remind members that they have 10 business days to submit additional questions for the record, and I ask the witnesses to submit their responses within 10 business days upon receipt of the questions. And without objection, the subcommittee will stand adjourned.